All right, welcome to the Young Turks. We got a hell of a show for you guys tonight. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you. A little bit later in the program, Trump asks for more help from the Russians publicly. Unbelievable. Ukrainians have started to speak out against Tucker Carlson in specific. That's an amazing story. And then Republican orgies. They're back. Okay, so we've got more news on that. All right, but first, as always these days, I would say, unfortunately, we're going to start with the war in Ukraine, except today we have fortunate news, good news. So for that, we go to Anna.
All right. New reporting out of Ukraine indicates that Russia seems to be retreating in its invasion, although they're trying to spin it as an effort to move closer to peace negotiations. Regardless of what their intentions are here, any movement away from parts of Ukraine is a good update. But let me tell you what they're saying, what Russian officials are saying, and then we'll kind of debunk some of the narratives coming from the Kremlin. So as Reuters reports, Russia promised on Tuesday, meaning today, to scale down military operations around Ukraine's capital and north, while Kyiv proposed adopting neutral status in confidence-building steps that were the first signs of progress toward negotiating peace. So far it sounds rosy. It sounds like things are headed in the right direction. But I want you all to keep in mind how much Vladimir Putin really miscalculated this war. The fact that the economic sanctions have in fact taken a toll on Russia, including its oligarchs. And there's also clear signs that now the military in Ukraine is no longer playing defense. They're recapturing territory that was taken over by Russia. And we'll get to those details in just a second. Now, Russia's deputy defense minister said this: in order to increase mutual trust and create the necessary conditions for further negotiations and achieving the ultimate goal of agreeing and signing an agreement, a decision was made to radically, by a large margin, reduce military activity in the Kyiv and Chernihiv directions. Now, they're saying that they're going to retreat from essentially the northern part of Ukraine. However, we're still seeing pretty heavy and aggressive fighting in the eastern portion of Ukraine. And notably, that statement didn't mention where we're seeing the heavy fighting, places like Kharkiv, Sumy, and yes, Mariupol as well. One US official says that the real rationale behind this announcement isn't about peace, but it's more about the fact that Vladimir Putin is losing, so he's looking for a way out. This US official, who didn't go on the record with his or her name, said, "We believe any movement of Russian forces from around Kyiv in a redeployment is a redeployment, not a withdrawal. They are shifting gears, and probably because they failed with their initial offensive." So Cenk, I actually think that analysis or that statement from that unnamed US official is correct. I think that Putin is obviously having a hard time in certain portions of Ukraine. And so they don't have the funding necessary to continue on with this so-called military operation. So I could totally see him really focusing his efforts on eastern Ukraine while kind of retreating from the northern portion.
Yeah, so I think that statement is accurate, although not that helpful. Another retired general talked about how Russia's getting its ass kicked. I'd cool it with that kind of talk, because the reality is there isn't that much of a difference between losing and peace. I mean, you get to peace either by someone winning or getting to a stalemate situation where both sides realize there isn't much more to gain here, so let's get to a negotiated settlement. You don't often get to peace in the middle of war because one side had a change of heart. That's just not how it works. So the fact that he's losing is what's leading to peace, and that's great news. So I don't want people to lose sight of what this story's about. This is fantastic news. So if the Russians are really withdrawing to eastern Ukraine, it doesn't mean the war is over. It doesn't mean that they won't do tremendous damage. It doesn't mean that they're going to get to an easy peace settlement. But it does mean that they are no longer trying to take all of Ukraine, and that the Ukrainians that did a brilliant job of standing up to them and are now actively driving them east. and the chances of peace now are much greater than they were obviously during the initial invasion or really any time up until now. So this is terrific news.
Right, and I understand the importance of drawing that distinction, right? What the real purpose is for Vladimir Putin retreating from the northern portion of Ukraine. It's because you want to ensure that what Putin is doing is based on a genuine, good faith effort to negotiate a peace deal. And if that's not the case, well, it's very possible that once everyone's guard is down, he might pursue the northern portion of Ukraine again, right? Like I understand like wanting to really decipher what the intentions are here. And I think that the analysis is right. I agree with you. I don't think those statements are very helpful, especially when you're dealing with someone like Vladimir Putin who has, I mean, he's very similar to Donald Trump in that he has thin skin. He's a narcissist, an egomaniac, and you don't want to persuade him to continue acting irrationally and to continue with this war. But at the same time, I do think that the way Biden has handled this so far, based on what we know, how he has managed to kind of toe that line to avoid any type of escalation, how he's refused to do a no-fly zone, how he's prevented this from turning into a serious nuclear threat. That is not an easy task to do. I would not have expected that Biden of all people would know how to toe that line as well as he has with this particular issue. But it seems like the sanctions are working. And it seems like Vladimir Putin deciding to surround himself with a bunch of yes men who constantly tell him exactly what he wants to hear is not really a smart strategy if you want to make informed decisions on an invasion.
Yeah, so look, my overall point is take the win. So for the generals talking about kicking Russian ass, no, don't goad them. What are you doing? Like if they're withdrawing, let them withdraw. There's no reason to antagonize anybody. Let's make this war as short as possible. And then secondly, does Putin need a face-saving gesture? Of course he does. People always pretend that there's only one country. Like our domestic politics matters, but Ukrainian domestic politics, that maybe that they matter a little bit because they're our allies. But Russian domestic politics don't matter at all. No, Russian domestic politics are really, really important to ending the war. So if Putin can find a way of saying, yes, we have taken new breakaway republics and we did exactly what our goal was, that'll allow him to leave. Good. Is it true? It's definitely not true. He clearly wanted all of Ukraine. That's why they tried to surround Kyiv. That's why they bombed the most western cities. That's why they had a 40-mile caravan of tanks and 200,000 ground troops. It's definitely not true, but who cares? It's good that he is falling back on a position that is less than taking all of Ukraine. That is a terrific development that we should encourage. And then finally, look, why is Biden so competent here? I'm not naive about it. It's because corporate interests are aligned. And they're both aligned internally. All the corporations agree what's best, generally speaking, for them, right? There might be some dissenters. The defense contractors presumably would like a longer war, but overall, most of the other corporate interests are on the side of let's resolve this relatively quickly so we can get to continuing trade and most importantly, for Europe to get its oil and gas from our corporations versus Russian corporations. And so that seems to have been accomplished. So corporations are coincidentally on the correct moral side of the issue here. Now they want to end the war and cement those deals. So that is why you're seeing the Biden administration show competence. Because when there are corporate interests involved, they're perfectly competent. So for example, if they want to defeat $15 minimum wage while pretending to be in favor of it so they can do marketing. When they want to defeat progressives, you've seen Democrats be very, very competent. The only times they are incompetent is when, oh golly gee, we just couldn't find a way to get you guys higher wages or health care. I guess drug companies are gonna continue to make all that money and the Chamber of Commerce is gonna be really, really happy, golly gee. It's a feigned incompetence. And you see here where it matters, both from a foreign policy perspective and from a corporate perspective, the Biden administration was perfectly competent.
All right, well, we'll fill you guys in on details as that story develops. But for now, while the US government is trying to fight Vladimir Putin's invasion into Ukraine, Donald Trump is actually looking for assistance from Vladimir Putin. So why don't we get to that story? Donald Trump has now called on Russia to dig up dirt and release information that could be damaging to Hunter Biden and potentially his father, Joe Biden. Now, he did this in the context of an interview. Let me set up the context before we get to that video. Trump reiterated his unproven claim that Elena Baturina, a Russian oligarch and the wife of former Moscow mayor Yuri Luskov, gave $3.5 million to a business that Hunter Biden helped found. So he was the co-founder of a company, an investment firm. It's known as the Rosemont Seneca Advisors. And so here is the allegation that Trump made, but more importantly, here's who he's looking for help from.
Why did the mayor of Moscow's wife give the Bidens, both of them, $3.5 million from? That's a lot of money. She gave him $3.5 million. So now I would think Putin would know the answer to that. I think he should release it. I think we should know that answer.
Now, let me just note that even in that statement, Trump couldn't get his facts straight. The person that he's referring to is the wife of a former mayor in Russia, but it doesn't matter. The facts don't matter, and I'll get into the details about the allegations in a little bit. But before I do it, obviously this is reminiscent of what Trump did back in 2016 when he was urging the Russians to assist him on something else. Let's watch that.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
And of course, let's not forget about the fact that Donald Trump withheld congressionally appropriated military funding for Ukraine back in 2019 in an effort to essentially hold it over the head of Vladimir Zelensky to get him to announce some sham investigation into the Bidens, right? So he was holding that money hostage specifically to ensure that he could get the leader of Ukraine to announce some sham investigation to hurt his political opponent. This is what Trump does. This is who he is. And he'll continue doing it because there's never really any consequences for it.
Yeah, so we do news in a funny time, right? Because what Trump is doing is super obvious. He is asking Vladimir Putin, the butcher of Moscow, for help in the middle of him butchering Ukrainians. He's doing it right now. Putin invaded Ukraine. There's 5,000 civilians dead in Mariupol alone. The other day, the Ukrainians did something really powerful where they put out a bunch of baby strollers for every baby that was killed or every child that was killed in that particular town. I mean, and Putin is doing all of this for his ego, for empire, a war of aggression, a clear monster. And Trump doesn't care at all. Instead, he's obsessed still with Hunter Biden. And so he's asking Putin for help publicly. You just saw it. You saw it with your own eyes. And he said, oh man, if Putin could just release. And is it true, by the way? Of course not. It's another conspiracy theory. That's insanity. Remember, he held up the aid to Ukraine, which turned out to be very, very relevant, based on another conspiracy theory that wasn't true either. So even if Zelensky wanted to help Trump in order to get the weapons to be able to deter a Russian invasion, which he was not able to deter, even if he wanted to, he couldn't because Trump had made up a Looney Tune thing that wasn't true. So you can't get evidence for a thing that isn't true. So look, that's why I say we're doing news at a funny time in American history, because for anyone who's sane, all of that is not just obvious, it's on tape. You can see it with your own eyes. You can, if you have any degree of logic, you could see exactly what he's doing. But there's about 40% of the country that looks at that and thinks, no, that's my leader. And I say that because today a poll came out, he's in a theoretical matchup, he's beating Biden by 8 points today. If the
doesn't surprise me.
If the election were held today, Trump would win easily. Against Kamala Harris, he has an 11-point lead. So the country looks at this madman who's trying to help a tyrant who's in the middle of butchering civilians, and they go, yeah, we'd like him back.
Yeah, look, Cenk, it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me because what we've seen from Biden domestically has not been great, right? So while we've been fair to Biden in regard to how he's handled the Russian invasion in Ukraine, which is not a difficult thing to handle, domestically speaking, it's been one excuse after the next, right? And remember, what really did Trump in, the reason why he was not reelected in 2020 was his handling of COVID. And I think that Biden really harmed himself by putting out that speech where he claimed, as soon as we get people vaccinated, we'll be past it, COVID will be over, we'll be able to go to our family barbecues and enjoy ourselves. And clearly that didn't happen. Some schools are still grappling with this issue. Some schools are still doing distance learning and all of that. People are frustrated. At the same time, economically speaking, what has Biden given the American people that Donald Trump didn't? And I'm being honest here, okay? Donald Trump was awful. The only real agenda item that he managed to get through was massive tax cuts for the rich to the tune of $2 trillion. Biden campaigned on reversing those tax cuts for the rich. The first thing he did, though, was propose legislation that did not reverse the Trump era tax cuts for the rich, that went halfway, knowing full well that he would get rejected by people like Senators Sinema and Manchin. And then he uses that as an excuse. He hasn't applied any pressure to those senators. He hasn't done any hard work necessary to essentially make them bend to his will. He's the president of the United States. And to be quite honest with you, when you see someone like Manchin, effectively serving as the president and Biden sitting back and letting it happen, what does that communicate to the American people? It communicates weakness.
Yeah.
Period.
So to your point, Anna, foreign policy wins don't last that long in American politics. So George H.W. Bush, after the first Gulf War, had a 91% approval rating. He lost the next election, and not that much later. And the reason is because domestic policy is much more important to the average American than foreign policy, because it affects their actual lives, gas prices, their salaries, healthcare, etc. Right? So that matters a lot more. So the fact that Biden has done great on foreign policy but miserable on domestic policy is not going to help his election chances. It's just a matter of simple political calculation. It doesn't mean he should do bad in foreign policy or ignore foreign policy. I'm thrilled that he did great in balancing interests in Ukraine, but he also has to do just as well in domestic policy. Otherwise, it's not going to matter much. And on the Republican side, they are locked in. They're 200% locked into Trump, or in a best case scenario, a Trump clone. So Trump, the most accurate thing he ever said was, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, and no one would care. For his followers, that is enormously true. So I'll give you an outrageous example, and then I'll prove that example is true. If today, instead of saying, hey, I would like Putin's help in targeting Hunter Biden with a kooky conspiracy theory, he had said, I would like to make out with Vladimir Putin. Just like neck and give each other hickeys, etc. No Republican would care. He would not lose a single vote. Now you think, oh, come on, Cenk, you're being outrageous and that's hyperbolic. Think about it. He said that Kim Jong-un and him fell in love and wrote love letters to one another. He didn't lose one vote over it. Kim Jong-un is a worse tyrant.
About it.
Yeah, and he still bragged about it yesterday, the other day. We covered it on the show yesterday. And Kim Jong-un is a worse dictator than Putin, and didn't lose a single Republican vote. Kim Jong-un is a communist dictator. And all Republicans are like, oh, you fell in love with a communist dictator. No problem. You still hate brown and black people? Great, we're in. So those are the Republicans, and independents are very, very easily swayed. And Biden has not swayed them at all on domestic issues. That's why Trump can be brazenly, openly corrupt and ask the help of a tyrant, and he won't suffer any consequences.
Also, let me just, I guess, give Republicans a word of advice. Look, the Hunter Biden stuff, everything I've seen about it has been incredibly boring, okay? Like they're latching onto Hunter Biden, they won't let go, they're putting out the conspiracy theories. Hey guys, You don't have to dig that deep for conspiracy theories, okay? If you're worried about nefarious funding taking place, all right, well, why don't you take a look at the money in politics that essentially rules our democratic system, right? Like that it's out in the open, and they're deciding, no, let's make up some story about the wife of a former mayor in Russia who allegedly gave an investment firm that was co-founded by Hunter Biden $3.5 million. We don't have any evidence of that really, and we don't know why that would be an issue for Joe Biden, but nonetheless, that's the big nefarious conspiracy theory. Okay, I mean, there's all sorts of nefarious funding, dark money pouring into campaigns for both Democrats and Republicans in our Congress on a regular basis. And it amazes me that they decide to ignore that and focus on Hunter freaking Biden. I got news for you guys. Hunter Biden's not president. No one cares about Hunter Biden. Why don't you focus on the greed and the legalized bribery that rules politics in America today? But I guess that's a little too boring for them since it's out in the open.
Look, I can prove it definitively for the right wingers that their leaders and their commentators are corrupt. And they might even understand this. Look, guys, we call out our own side all the time. Pelosi's raised like $1 billion. What is that? That's like $1 billion in bribes. They're not giving that money for their health. They're doing it for political advantage, those donors. And do they control Pelosi and Biden and Schumer? Of course they do. We're honest about our side. And it would be so easy to attack Democrats on that. But the reason why your Tucker Carlsons and all of your political leaders and all of your right-wing commentators do not do that is because they are equally corrupt. It's the most obvious thing in the world. Why don't you ask them, hey, why don't you call out corruption? Forget the Republican side. I know you think that they're all angels, right? Donald Trump is your savior, your Lord, and your, whatever he is to you, okay? So don't touch him, his poor feelings. I know, he's very thin-skinned. So why don't you ask all of your commentators, why aren't you attacking Democrats on the obvious bribes that they take from corporate interests? Oh, you're not talking about it because then you would have to expose Republicans who take the same exact bribes, including your beloved Donald Trump, who's one of the biggest crooks there is.
Exactly. Well, we got to take a break, but when we come back, Tucker Carlson can't get enough of the pro-Putin propaganda. This time he's using, he's all about intersectionality, Cenk. This time he's finding a way to implement his fear mongering about radical Islamists in an effort to support Vladimir Putin. We've got that story and more when we come back.
Back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Now let's go to Klitschko versus Tucker. This is fun.
All right.
Is it possible, if we did that one of those 6,000 nuclear weapons might wind up in the hands of some anti-American terror group and be used against our civilian population here? A nuclear weapon.
Yes, Tucker Carlson is still unapologetically defending Vladimir Putin in every opportunity he has. And in the latest episode of his show, he decided to specifically pretend as though US foreign policy in regard to Russia is regime change, even though Biden had made it abundantly clear that that was not the policy. So here's Tucker Carlson fear-mongering, not about Vladimir Putin and all of the disastrous war crimes he's committed in Ukraine, but he's here to fear-monger about Biden and alleged regime change, which of course is not being implemented. Let's watch.
Our policy, according to the President of the United States, is to take Putin out, to remove him as head of state. To be clear, regime change in Russia has never been American policy. And this is hardly the first time we have tangled with Russia. We've had far more threatening circumstances than this one. The United States, you'll recall, waged a proxy war against the Russian government for 11 years in Vietnam. Nearly 60,000 Americans died in that war. And yet, no American president mentioned regime change at the Kremlin. Why? Because they were soft on the Russians? No. Because Russia has about 6,000 nuclear weapons.
Now, we're gonna get to the nuclear weapons in just a moment because Tucker apparently has no problem with Putin being in charge of those Russian nuclear weapons. However, I do want to clear the record for, I don't know, now the second time on this show to make it clear that the US is not attempting to overthrow Vladimir Putin. In fact, Biden was asked specifically about that just yesterday. Here's what he had to say.
You now regret saying that because your government has been trying to walk that back. Did your words complicate matters?
Well, you asked 3 different questions. I'll answer them all. Number one, I'm not walking anything back. The fact of the matter is I was expressing the moral outrage I felt toward the way Putin is dealing and the actions of this man. Just brutality. Half the children in Ukraine. I just come from being with those families. And so, but I want to make it clear, I wasn't then, nor am I now, articulating a policy change. I was expressing the moral outrage that I feel, and I make no apologies for it.
He wasn't articulating a policy change. And guess what? Tucker Carlson and his producer goons know that. Okay, they know that that's the case. They're intentionally lying to the audience to make it appear as though the US is trying to overthrow Putin, and it's just not true. Now, I want to go to one more video here because this is where Tucker Carlson just makes a bizarre claim about how overthrowing Vladimir Putin would mean that the nukes would actually end up in the wrong hands as if they're in the right hands today. Let's watch.
Russia has about 6,000 nuclear weapons. So let's say we eliminated the Russian head of state and of course that country's central government. What would happen to those weapons? Well, let's see. In Iraq, Saddam's weapons stockpiles, all conventional, wound up in the hands of militia that used them to kill Americans. So Russia has a large and restive population of Islamic extremists. Do we think it's possible that with no one running the country, because of course we have no chosen successor to Putin, is it possible if we did that one of those 6,000 nuclear weapons might wind up in the hands of some anti-American terror group and be used against our civilian population here? A nuclear weapon.
A nuclear weapon, Cenk, because Russia threatening to use nukes in this war is not a big problem. As long as Vladimir Putin's the one putting out those threats, nothing to worry about. But the people we really need to be worried about, according to Tucker Carlson, in this particular conflict is radical Islamists. It's the Muslims we need to be worried about.
In Russia, okay.
In Russia, yeah.
Yeah, so, but to be fair, Anna, if Muslim extremists got a hold of some Russian military equipment and Russian nukes, they could invade a nearby country like, I don't know, like maybe Ukraine, and they could kill thousands of civilians and destroy whole cities. And they could threaten to use nukes in the middle of that war and chemical and biological weapons. Oh, right, Putin already did all of that. But Tucker Carlson doesn't have any problem with that. And he thinks his audience doesn't have any problem with that. But imagine if brown people had nukes. Imagine if it was Muslims. And to be fair to Tucker Carlson, he knows what's gonna work with his audience. His audience thinks, oh yeah, right-wing authoritarian dictator Vladimir Putin, who's destroying Ukraine and killing all those civilians, but he's white and he's right-wing. So come on, he's not that bad. Muslims, oh my God, Muslims, their faces melting. Yeah, look guys, it is what it is. The Fox News audience is obviously full of bigots and Tucker Carlson knows that. So he plays it up to them. All of this is super obvious. Look, the Biden administration walked back that one line that Biden had at the end of his speech that the reporter was referencing about half a dozen times, including Biden himself. You saw it with your own eyes on tape there. You think Tucker Carlson's crew didn't see any of that? Those are all massive news stories. Probably the biggest news story over the weekend. No, obviously they saw it and they chose to lie to you as if Biden had changed US policy and was in favor of regime change after they had already walked it back all those times. And it was never a policy statement. It was just one sentence that he went off the teleprompter because he was mad at Putin. So Tucker knows with absolute certainty that that is not the policy of the Biden administration, yet he chose to lie. But guys, think about it this way. He's not lying to us. We know he's a con man, and we know he's all those terrible things that he is. He's lying to his audience. He thinks his audience is full of racist, bigoted schmucks. So he can say any lie he wants and they'll believe him anyway. You think they're gonna research something? You think they're gonna look it up? No, Tucker Carlson has the appropriate amount of respect for his audience, which is zero.
You know, the thing that I'm trying to figure out though is what is the incentive to lie about what US foreign policy toward Russia is? We're not attempting to get rid of Vladimir Putin. I mean, look, the sanctions could help propel that. The sanctions could help trigger that, especially if some of these Russian oligarchs are really feeling the financial weight of having to deal with these sanctions. But aside from that, I mean, he even tried to make it appear as though we're sending troops to Ukraine, which is not true. Biden has said on multiple occasions that under no circumstance will he put boots on the ground in Ukraine. Yes, he has sent troops to neighboring countries because those are, our NATO allies, and there are certain, agreements that the US has entered in regard to those countries. But outside of that, what is the incentive here? And I think it goes along with Tucker's attempts to appeal to populists in the country, individuals who are rightly sick of war, who are tired of US intervention in various countries and various regions of the world. They have the right idea, but what I think Tucker is trying to do is tap into those groups of people in an effort to make himself out to be this anti-intervention, pro-America guy. He's trying to toe the line with this populist rhetoric. But fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, all he really does is A, lie about what the official policy is, as we've made that abundantly clear. But more importantly, B, he provides cover for Vladimir Putin and the behavior that he engages in, including the invasion of Ukraine, the slaughter of civilians, including children.
So Anna, you're opening up a can of worms on why Tucker does this, right? So I agree with you that a big part of it is this fake populism that he has. And he thinks he's probably gonna get not just right wingers who are tired of war, but he thinks he can peel off some left wingers doing that. But it's already been exposed. He tried 1,000 times with Glenn Greenwald and Tulsi Gabbard and Jimmy Dore. He brings them on to be the fake left, et cetera. But all those guys are at this point obvious con men, and they have no left-wing supporters left at all. Whoever's their fans are right wingers. But so I don't know if Tucker's just miscalculating there and in kind of an old school way of appearing to be fake bipartisan, right? Then this second theory, and this is only mine, and I know that it's a bit speculative and it's a minor part of it. But if Tucker Carlson is gonna run for president, well, the Russians helped Donald Trump tremendously, whether they cooperated or they didn't. The Russians did actually get those emails that Trump publicly asked for from Hillary Clinton, and they did reveal it, and they did help Donald Trump enormously. So Tucker Carlson's thinking if he runs for president, well, he's gonna have the entire Russian intelligence operation behind him, and that might be helpful to him. But the third part I think is the most important. It turns out Tucker Carlson is a true conservative traditionalist. And so we've talked about this before. There's a philosopher, I hate calling him that because he's so dumb, who's a fascist in Russia. He's a current day so-called philosopher. His name is Alexander Dugin. And Steve Bannon has said many times about how much he admires him. Tucker Carlson has mentioned him. And this guy says we need to go back to traditional values, religion, the community, et cetera. They hate individualism. And they believe in worldwide conservative unification, and basically they're betraying their own nation in favor of what they view to be their ideology. That's why you're seeing the t-shirts that's filtered all the way down to the voters that say, would rather be a Russian than a Democrat. In other words, I don't give a damn about America. I prefer Russia as long as they're being right wingers. So that's the camp ideologically that Tucker Carlson's in. That's why you see him doing all of this insane rhetoric on behalf of Vladimir Putin. So why is he doing this nuke talk now? The nukes are already in incredibly dangerous hands. They're in the hands of the madman Vladimir Putin. But since Tucker Carlson likes Putin and his ideology, he then has to say, well, okay, let's leave him alone. Let's not do any regime changes, which we're not doing anyway. And let's withdraw, get out of there. Let Putin do whatever he wants to Ukraine. because it'll hurt Biden and it'll help his beloved Vladimir Putin. So that's who Tucker Carlson is, and every sane person understands that. It's just his right-wing audience that still thinks, oh yeah, the boogeyman is the brown man, and so anything Tucker says, I'll listen to right away.
I mean, look, it's just amazing to me that conservative viewers can follow along with this stuff, because on one hand, you have Tucker Carlson claiming that Biden's implementing this insane policy of regime change in Russia, and then other conservative talk show hosts claim that Biden's too weak because he refuses to implement a no-fly zone over Ukraine. So which one is it? Is he this crazy pro-war zealot, or is he this weakling that refuses to escalate the war with a no-fly zone? It's just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, but Anna, that's a good point, and I'm just gonna say real quick, there is a real divide, even on Fox News. Like Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson don't agree at all. Sean Hannity is more of a traditional Republican, and he wants the Republicans to be authoritarian here, but he still generally believes in the concept of America. He might be against democracy if Trump loses, but he's more of an establishment guy, a corporate guy, and that's where most of them are. Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon are in a different camp of that traditionalist, populist, Duginist camp. I know this reference to Dugin is so obscure for people, and it's unbelievable that they believe in this fanatic and literal fascist. Dugin calls for tremendous violence against his political opponents. So the Tucker Bannon contingent is much more dangerous. The Hannitys and the other guys on Fox News are normal, run-of-the-mill, awful Republicans, but the Tucker and Bannon crew are a new dangerous breed of neo-fascists.
Well, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit about how the mayor of Kyiv feels about, people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. Don't miss that. It's an amazing video. We've got that and more when we come back.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Look, for some of you, we do a social break where we read members' comments, etc. And somebody just asked about the fake left and how you can tell. Look, it's super easy. Right now, Jimmy Dore is doing an interview with Lara Logan after she just said
he's on a panel with her.
Okay, or whatever he's doing with her. Okay, thank you for clarifying. After she said that wildly anti-Semitic conspiracy theory about the Rothschilds, etc. There ain't no progressive doing that. I'm sure that he's calling her a brave truth teller as we speak, okay? So, I haven't seen Jimmy Dore or Glenn Greenwald agree with the left in years. All they ever say is, oh my God, the right wing is so right about everything. It's not that hard to tell at all. All right, anyways, we got more news.
Recently, Vladimir Klitschko was asked about the pro-Putin propagandists in the United States, people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. And surprisingly, the question came from Eric Bolling, who is also a right-winger. So let's take a look at how that conversation went down.
There's some very popular television hosts, Tucker Carlson. I talked about a popular Candace Owens as well. Conservatives who would typically, I don't know why they're not supporting you in Ukraine, but they're not. What do you say to those people?
If you passively observe what is going on, and we do share the same principles of freedom and democratic principles, like the United States, like the Western world, so to speak, if you passively observing, you're part of this invasion. Blood is on your hands too.
So he accuses them of having blood on their hands. I thought it was an interesting question. His answer was fine. I would have liked to see a little more focus on the fact that people like Tucker Carlson are being utilized by the Russian state for their propaganda purposes. The fact that his segments are being used in Russia for propaganda tells you everything you need to know about the perspective that Tucker is bringing to the table.
Yeah, so this is among the 1,000 reasons why I believe in and advocate for free speech. So yes, there are lines. If you threaten physical violence, that's not part of free speech. But a lot of times people say, "Oh, shut down the other side." You know, the right wing says burn their books. Some of the left wing say don't let any of those guys speak or platform them or whatever. But look, now all of a sudden there's a real divide in the Republican Party and among conservative commentators. So Eric Bolling is in the Sean Hannity camp of traditional Republicans, and they have 1,000 problems, and we fight them. And I've done, I don't know, a dozen videos about how terrible Eric Bolling is. But all of a sudden, here they are calling out Tucker Carlson, a fellow conservative. And us calling out Tucker Carlson is effective for people who are either on our camp or in the middle. But for the right wing, it doesn't work at all. You could say things that are indisputably correct about Tucker Carlson, and the conservative reaction is blah, 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 right? But if Eric Bolling says it, it becomes a little bit more interesting because they're used to watching the platforms that he's on. They're used to agreeing with him. So there's no question that Bolling threw Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens under the bus there, and he did it on purpose because he doesn't agree with them. And he's probably both frustrated, confused, and maybe even angry that they are openly supporting Putin, which is a weird and insane thing to do. I would say even more so for a traditional conservative. So they've got some real disagreement there, and that's great to see. That makes for a healthier conversation. Now, the more important person obviously here is Klitschko. His brother's Vitaly Klitschko, who is the mayor of Kyiv, so a very important position. They both decided to stay and fight. Vladimir decided to join the Ukrainian army and very physically fight back. And so, of course, he's going to call out anyone who's supporting the Russians and letting the Ukrainians die. And the more support the Russians have, the more they're encouraged to kill more Ukrainians. So, look, I kid around about getting in the ring with Joe Rogan or whatever, but the right wing is often serious about that stuff. If they'd like to step in the ring with Klitschko, I'd pay to see that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'd love to see. I mean, Tucker had no problem doing Dancing with the Stars. Maybe get in the ring with Klitschko. I'd love to see that. That'd be fun. It'd be really fun.
Yeah, I mean, look.
Anyway,
Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson are two biggest fans of Putin in America, right? And you got the two Klitschko brothers. I know our right wing is super tough, super alpha. I'm sure they could take him. Go get him, guys. See how that turns out for you.
All right, well, why don't we move on to our next story? We've got more news to get to.
The committee is now investigating whether the president and top aides used so-called burner or disposable phones to avoid scrutiny of their calls during that time. The logs do show several incoming and outgoing calls on the morning of January 6th. Including from Rudy Giuliani and former President Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon. At 8:37 a.m., Trump spoke with Bannon, who sources say told him to call Vice President Mike Pence and urge him to block certification of the election. Trump later did phone Pence, failing to persuade him, but that call is not listed in the records.
Oof, there is some serious drama and some serious detail coming out of the select panel investigating the riots on January 6th. What they have learned based on internal White House documents that have been handed over to them by the National Archives is that on January 6th, the day of the Capitol riots, Donald Trump had a massive window of time, 7 hours and 37 minutes, in which he had not logged into any phone calls, official phone calls. And there is now some suspicion that previous accusations that he was using burner phones to avoid scrutiny could be proven as a result of the lack of official calls being made through the White House. So there might be use of things like burner phones. Maybe he used someone else's phone while making phone calls. But the idea of Trump not making any phone call at all in the time span of 7 hours and 37 minutes on January 6th is ridiculous. Of course, he was communicating with people. In fact, there are reports of 2 such phone calls that he had that day that were not in the official White House call logs. So let's get into the details here, because this is in my opinion, the most interesting update on this investigation. Here's what we found based on CBS News and the Washington Post. CBS reported that the lack of an official White House notation of any calls placed to or by Trump for 457 minutes from 11:17 a.m. to 6:54 p.m. on January 6, 2021, means there is no record of the calls made by Trump as his supporters descended on the US Capitol. Now, since there's no record, you shouldn't be under the assumption that he made no calls. He absolutely did make more calls. We have more details on that. Let's watch the video.
As chaos engulfed the Capitol building on January 6th, President Trump spoke repeatedly on the phone with allies and supporters, some of whom urged him to put an end to the violence. But none of those calls are reflected in the 11 pages of those White House records for January 6th given to the House Select Committee. There is a massive 7-hour and 37-minute gap in calls from 11:17 a.m. to 6:54 p.m., which includes the most violent period of the attack. CBS News has confirmed at least 2 calls during the attack that do not appear on the phone log or the daily diary. One call from Trump to Utah Republican Mike Lee, and another call to Trump from House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, who described it to Norah O'Donnell by phone as the violence was unfolding.
So again, those calls with Mike Lee and with Kevin McCarthy happened. They're not on the official White House call logs, meaning he made those calls or had those conversations in some other way, whether it was using a burner phone or using one of his aides' phones. Now, Trump is pretending to be stupid about all of this. This is his statement of denial. He says, quote, "I have no idea what a burner phone is. To the best of my knowledge, I have never even heard the term." But John Bolton, who of course was in the Trump administration and worked closely with him, made it clear that not only does Trump know what burner phones are, burner phones came up in conversations quite often in the Trump White House.
Yeah, so first of all, notice that Trump didn't even deny that he made other calls. He just said, "I don't know what a burner phone is." That's not a denial. Second of all, does he know what a burner phone is? Of course, it's like the billionth lie in a row. Yes, there are now officials like Bolton coming out and saying, no, we specifically talked about burner phones with Trump. He knows exactly what it is. But did you really need that confirmation? The guy's a pathological liar. So why is he lying? Well, there's this issue of presidential records. So the president is supposed to be making calls on the record, not on burner phones like a drug dealer. But that's a relatively minor law. He's broken it hundreds, maybe thousands of times. And of course, Democrats have trouble holding him accountable for massive crimes, let alone that one. No, what he's really worried about is what a judge referred to the other day, which was obstructing Congress. And so that is the very serious crime of trying to stop the certification of an election. And if you have evidence of him basically encouraging the violence against the politicians who are looking to certify the election so that they could put in the fake electors as Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon wanted to do, et cetera, and you have evidence to that effect, well, then they would be guilty of a very, very serious crime.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting because the few calls that are available, they're officially logged, and we know the details of those conversations. Those weren't great conversations to begin with, which calls into question just how bad the other phone calls were. The phone calls that were made in some other way and were not officially logged. And to your point, Cenk, in regard to Democrats failing to hold him accountable, look, Trump's been impeached twice by the House where Democrats had control, but was acquitted in the Senate both times because the Senate was controlled by Republicans. So I can see how Republicans have stood in the way of real accountability over and over again. But in regard to this particular investigation and the individuals who hold the power necessary to prosecute Trump or to go after him for these alleged felonies, it would really rely on Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, to do that. And it seems like he has been unwilling to really hold Trump accountable for his role in what took place on January 6th. Attempting to do this through Congress is ridiculous. They don't have the power to do that. The only thing that this select committee has succeeded in doing so far is getting federal judges to agree to force Trump administration officials to hand over the necessary documents to conduct their investigation. But I did want to get into some of the other details in regard to the phone calls that he did make. First off, let's talk about his conversation with Mike Pence on the day of January 6th. There was one call he had with Mike Pence that was not logged as an official White House call. Trump's final call with Pence is not listed in the call log, even though multiple people close to both men said that the call occurred sometime in the late morning before Trump headed to the Save America rally. During their conversation, Pence told Trump, quote, "When I go to the Capitol, I'll do my job and not block Biden's certification." And that enraged Trump, according to the book Peril. So that was widely reported after the book was published with these details. I do want to move on to some of the calls that we do know about, the official calls, and it's just amazing to me that this is already bad. So again, the calls that we don't have record of had to have been worse. The records show that former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon, who said on his January 5th podcast, all hell is going to break loose tomorrow, spoke with Trump twice on January 6th. In a call that morning, Bannon urged Trump to continue to pressure Pence to block congressional certification of Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election. The documents obtained by the committee show Trump having several previously unreported exchanges on January 6th, including brief calls with Bannon and personal lawyer Rudy Giuliani that morning before Trump had a final call with Pence in which the vice president told him he was not going to block Congress from formalizing Biden's victory. The call to the vice president was part of Trump's attempt to put into motion a plan advocated by Bannon and outlined in a memo written by conservative lawyer John Eastman. And of course, that plan was to essentially replace electors with these alternate electors who were more favorable to Trump and would essentially hand victory to the man who didn't actually win the general election, Donald Trump.
Yeah, so even corporate Democrats like Representative Luria are now getting super frustrated with Merrick Garland. And so she said basically, do your job. And that was really surprising because establishment Democrats never turn on each other and they're usually uniformly cowards. And so I was very surprised to see that kind of frustration coming from the conservative wing of the Democratic Party towards Merrick Garland. So why is Merrick Garland doing what he's doing, which is basically aiding and abetting Trump and his top aides and protecting them from the law? Because that's what Democrats do. They generally always protect Republicans after they get into office. And he's running the same playbook. They're scared of what Republicans will say about them, and they're scared of what Republicans will do to them if they get into power, so they always leave them alone. And their cutoff line is the establishment, whoever's in the establishment and who isn't, right? So that's why Merrick Garland has actually issued an indictment against Steve Bannon, because Steve Bannon is considered not in the establishment. But when it comes to somebody like Mark Meadows, who was a former congressman and was the chief of staff for Donald Trump, he won't even agree with the House Democrats, and he won't pursue any charges. Forget the actual insurrection. We're gonna get to that later in terms of how the legal proceedings would proceed. No, even for not testifying, for refusing a subpoena from the House, well, that's an automatic indictment. But nope, Garland, the head of the Justice Department for Biden, will not pursue it for Trump's top aides that apparently the Democrats think are still inside the establishment and inside the club. And the reason they're not pursuing it in the case of Trump is they're scared to death of Trump. Again, because honestly, Merrick Garland's a coward. This is not hard. They try to overthrow democracy. If you don't do something about it now, they'll do it again, for sure. But he's too scared to do it. And he's scared of Trump. And the other thing is, of course, Trump was president. And my guess is the Biden administration is saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's take it easy on accountability of former presidents, because Biden one day might also be a former president. That's how the elite protect each other. That's what allows fascists like Trump and Bannon to take advantage of this system and the weakness within the system.
All right, that does it for our first hour. We're going to take a brief break, but when we come back, we've got more news for you, including a very serious investigation into alleged cocaine-fueled orgies within the Republican caucus. We've got that story and more when we come back.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.